It's an honor and delight to be here with Rabbi Dina Najman, who is Senior Rabbi of the Kehilah in Riverdale and is the head of the Gemara Department at SAR Academy and a bioethicist and someone who I have admired for a long time as a great thinker and teacher of Torah and a moral exemplar. So thank you for taking some time to talk. Talking about Agunot today, an issue that is a very painful subject. And we can dive right in. What are some, maybe you can give a brief overview of what the problem is, and then the question of, are there ways to release a woman when her husband actually does not want to give her a get? Yeah.
Okay, well, first, before I start, I have to say that if anyone's a moral exemplar of Shmuly, everyone in the virtual world out there should know what an extraordinary human being I'm actually talking with. So it's really an honor and privilege to be with you today. So let me define Agunot. It's a woman who's chained and tied to a marriage that she does not want to be in. It's completely from the Torah. It's completely in the husband's hands to give her a get, to give her a halachic divorce document stating that he doesn't want to be married to this person anymore. And it has to be completely from his will. She accepts it, and it can be put in her property. But he himself has to initiate and desire that divorce. And without that, a woman is not free to marry any other person. If she does, she's considered what we call an eshet ish, a woman who's in a forbidden relationship. Any children that result from that relationship are considered what we call mamzerim, where there's more halachic issues that emerge from that product. There is Takanat Rabbeinu Gershon in around 1000. Rabbeinu Gershon issued that men also need to be recipients of a get before they can get remarried. Not everyone, unfortunately, still follows that, and women. And so while we say that there are Agunot, there are also Agunim. That should be clear that it's in that situation. Just to clarify, Agunot can also refer to someone who has been in a marriage and a husband dies without them having children. And in that situation, a woman is not permitted to remarry until a next of kin either commits himself to a levirate marriage, what we call yibum, or, which we don't do anymore, the rabbis really don't approve of that type of relationship, or what they could do is something similar that we were familiar with Megillat Rut, where the husband, the brother-in-law or the next of kin, basically spits in a shoe and declares that he wants nothing to do with that relationship, freeing her also. But if she does not have that form of chalitza, she's not permitted also to another person, and that renders her an agunah as well. So, to your question of can women receive a get or be released from a marriage when the husband doesn't want to give a get. So to clarify, what I said about eshet ish and mamzerut is to be taken seriously. We need to be vigilant and careful when we're issuing gittin, without a doubt. But when the marriage is over, and it's clear that it's over, the get should not be used as a bargaining tool and a means to other things. It should not be in exchange for anything else. And all too often, we see how sad, you mentioned at the beginning, how sad. It's a very sad state of affairs where often, all too often, a get is held over a woman's head. And sometimes, even in the case of a man, it's true, but more often over the woman's head. And what we're talking about is money, where they want money. They'll take the children, kicked out of a community, and all seems to be utilized against this woman so that she can receive a get. And in order for her to do that, she has to she pays an enormous price for her freedom. And that simply should not be the case. So to the question at hand, what are the methods that have been put into place to prevent Agunot? So Agunot, in the first place, used to be viewed, if you look at the early rabbinic literature, It really were women whose husbands went out to war, or they went on business trips across an ocean. And
they didn't return.
We
don't know what happened to them.
We don't know what happened to them. And the
famous 9/11 case, for example, yeah.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. That was actually a reclaim of more of an earlier sources that people went to specifically because that's really what it used to be.
Right.
And we found a way. What do people do? So either people used to write letters before they went to war on business trips if I don't return. And let's say they didn't return, so then they have, and then if they decide to get married, if they remarried, they remarried, and that's tragic and sad. But the person can continue on with her life. And husbands understood that. The rabbis understood that. And I would also say that there were times when those letters weren't written. So what did the rabbis rely on? Normally you need 2 witnesses that someone has died or been killed they witnessed a storm and they knew that the person was on the boat. Or you need 1 witness now as opposed to 2. And so the rabbis were lenient in that position as well. That was the case, and we've seen those examples. But what do we do now when we have, or even with chalitza issues, people kind of search high and low. That's very important, and people work very hard to be able to issue chalitza, to be able to free a woman. And sometimes, by the way, in those situations with chalitza, the brother didn't want to bother, or it bothered, let's say the brother was remarried to someone, and he didn't want to take that responsibility of taking his brother's widow to wed, and didn't see the importance. So there were rabbis who really helped and tried to allow for this to happen, where she would be given chalitza so that she could remarry. But more recently, the one which we really know much more about now, because there are not only hundreds but thousands of cases where you have women whose husbands refuse to grant them a get, and when he doesn't want to do that, the pain of her freedom is and really her life is at stake. So one thing that we could do, and this is something that I really want to honor the Beit Din of America and others who have worked very hard to issue the prenuptial agreement, the postnuptial agreement even, stating that if a woman wants out of a marriage, and by the way, to make it really equal, if a woman or a man wants out of a marriage and the other spouse is refusing to grant that, but as we understand, it's really in the husband's hand more than the woman's hand to really issue the get. If that's able to, if there's a case where he doesn't want to issue the get, then he has to pay a fine. This is actually a civil document.
Yeah, I won't do a wedding without it.
Yeah, right. And a lot of rabbis have actually taken on to make sure that if he's withholding a get, he has to pay a fine, or she has to pay a fine. In some cases, if he doesn't pay the fine, refusal to pay the fine is incarceration. So that is, and what I said earlier, to be able to receive a get, the husband has to desire to give the get. He cannot be coerced into receiving a get. So then he has to want to not get rid of that. Like he has to want, it's more important to him to not have to pay such a heavy fine every single day, relative to how much he wants to not give his wife a get. So usually, in theory, that could work. Yeah. But then you have, and these are the different, and there's also a postnuptial agreement, by the way, that was also issued by Rabbi Willig, and that was something that people worked on as well. First of all, sadly, most people don't have a prenuptial agreement, as much as we have so many people now who are saying we are not going to do marriages without prenup, like you have Shmuly, like without a prenuptial agreement, you won't do a marriage. That's amazing, because what it's doing is it's putting into place some of these measures. However, a lot of people don't have them, and then what happens then? Then you're still stuck with the Agunot issue. But let's say they do have it, and this has been a case where someone says, you know what, I'd rather pay that debt fine. I'd rather be incarcerated. You have people like that who really would rather their wife remained chained, remained in such a horrible state, than to grant her freedom. And I say freedom because I think that's an important word that we need to use, because this is an issue of freeing the imprisoned. In Israel, what they're doing is they actually will put someone in prison. If
some of them will stay there for years. They'd rather be in prison.
They'll rather be in prison. And the other thing that they would rather do, also they take their passports away. So they're not even allowed to leave the country. These are some measures in place. But because of the type of individual sometimes, which is so vindictive and so severe and oppressive to his wife, he would rather suffer financial loss or incarceration rather than allowing his wife to be free. So what do we do beyond that? I would like to give a tremendous amount of
in addition to the problem for these women, it's a shunda on halacha. It makes the Torah look cruel.
Correct.
So it's important enough to release Agunot towards freedom, but also we have to redeem the Torah from a place of absurdity. That if it's hijacked in such a way that someone sick is sitting in a prison and this poor woman is enslaved also.
Right, so we have to look at those individuals because, of course, we really do care about the mamzerut and Eshet Ish issue, and it has to be something that he wants, and no matter how sick he is, he has to, if we're committed to the halachic system the way it is, we want it to work out. So I want to just first give Hakarat Tov to people like Rivka Hout and Blue Greenberg, who have worked tirelessly, and Rivka Hout, Aleh Shalom, and Blue Greenberg should be well, Ameh V'Esrim. That these are people who have worked to really try to find ways. And the prenuptial agreement, what they pushed for was very much thanks to their hard efforts and them going into Batei Din and working so hard. But I do want to talk about two Batei Din, and there are others. The Beit Din of America works hard. Rav Howard Jachter's Beit Din is kind and welcoming to women as opposed to a harsh environment where that's another aspect of what happens during the get proceedings. But there's another Beit Din. That's of Rabbi Simcha Kraus, should be well, and Rav Daniel Sperber, Shlita. And the two of them, and not only them, there are other Batei Din around, but they have worked very hard on something which is really mimicking what has been done in our past, and something which needs to be employed again. And if it is employed, and I believe it is employed in various Batei Din, but it's not out there, there's no transparency. And that is the concept of Hafkas Kedushin, which is nullifying a get, nullifying a Kedushin, or what we call bittul Kedushin. This is an important method, which I believe, and that's not the only thing, but this is an important method, and it can't solely be that. But based on the Ritva and others, even though the Ritva was a Dat Yachid, but others who followed him, like Rav Yehuda, the son of the Rosh, and others followed the Ritva. It wasn't Rav Peretz followed this opinion from the Ritva. He had Al Milis Smoch, and he himself had followers who really did this. The idea was, if you see that a person is acting in a certain way, which is so completely different from what the wife would have wanted, he expected in a spouse. If this person has totally transformed, and that's not who they thought, and you ask them, would you have married that person had they have been this like this? And she would have said, never, I would have never married.
I was deceived.
Right. So initially, by the way, in the Gemara, it's only the case of a man saying, had I known she was like this, had I known nice ideas, like she would have burnt my food or she wouldn't get, had I known that, I would have never married them, right? So it works there very clearly, but there are a few cases in the Rishonim where they say, and the Ritva's one, if you see that this person has been so abhorrent and violent or abusive or not the kind of husband she would have wanted, and becomes really mamish a different person, then that is grounds to say, potentially, I mean, there's a lot more information that you need that marriage is null and void. I'll give you two cases. One case is a very well-known case that just made the news last week, and it's not the first time this has been employed. And by the way, it wasn't only Rabbi Sperber's Beit Din, it's just that he was transparent about it, which was a case of a person who was abused, this woman who had an abusive husband, and they found out that he was actually in prison for abusing his first wife. She never knew about it. And then what happens is she finds out afterwards.
Yeah.
He was abusive at this since the very beginning.
Yeah.
And I encourage you, by the way, to read some of these discussions, because I think the transparency, the fact that they're writing out these decisions and they change the names to protect the individuals who are going to court. But I do believe that it's really important for you to see, everyone to see, how they're coming to these decisions. It's not just flippant. They actually have strong halachic standing to find this. So what did they do? So, and this person stayed married to this person for 10 years. And some people argue, like Rav Stav will argue, she was with him for 10 years. And this is where some of the psychology comes in. She stayed with him for 10 years. Yes, she stayed with him for 10 years. Why did she stay with him for 10 years? A, because it could be that she was told she needs to fix it. It could be that she didn't really realize it. It could be that she loves a person and she said, maybe I'm not understanding. Maybe she doesn't understand how marriage, needs to work. And at a certain point, and by the way, being married for 10 years by the time she gets to Beit Din doesn't mean that was the beginning of the process for her.
That's right.
She's been doing this for quite a while. Yeah. And basically 10 years in a person's life, in a young person's life, who wants to have a marriage and a family and a life, that person deserves to be freed. Another case came up. You can read about it in the Beit Din, the International Beit Din, where there are cases, let's say the husband's not intimate with her because he has some kind of impotency. And then she finds out about it later. And you can say on halachic grounds, this woman deserves onah. She deserves to have, one of, the three obligations that he even says in the marriage contract. He is not fulfilling his level of really giving her sexual pleasure. And that's something that she deserves to have. And if he doesn't keep his end of the bargain, and he never did, at the beginning, then she was she was brought into this kind of marriage where she shouldn't have been. And that also could be grounds for hafka'at kedushin. Now, someone might say maybe he has an issue, maybe he has a medical problem. So you wait for the medical problem, as she did, refuse to take medicine, this person. This person also had a case of mental illness. There was bipolar disorder as well, which she didn't know about. And there are other issues that came into, not that should be grounds for, because I think that's a slippery slope, that someone has a mental illness that they develop. But I think if he doesn't want treatment and he's abusive and he's not really a husband in the way she needs him to be, then that could be grounds for hafkad kedushin. Now look, every case in halacha is a case-by-case basis here. So I could say this and then say, oh, exactly like this should be in the other case. I wouldn't say that. And the people who are the great dayanim here wouldn't say that. But we need to consider what that would look like and why we wouldn't want to be thinking about that. The other case that I wanted to talk about is something that Rav Simcha Kraus mentioned, which is get zakui. Get zakui means that both parties agree that it would be best if they don't have this. This is a get. This isn't a nullification, but it is a get that would be in place that both agree that it would be for the best. And it's interesting because there was Rav, the chief Sephardi rabbi, Rav Masas from Yerushalayim, a number of years ago, actually employed the get zakui. He actually didn't even get the permission of the husband because it would be very clearly, it would be best if these people would not be married. It's called get zakui, and of course, this shouldn't be done in a vacuum. You need other individuals to come in and talk about how this. You have witnesses and you understand that this has been a complicated marriage, but you employ other tools and other methods so that the get would be able, they could actually almost force the get. They could do a coercive measure on a get. And those, Rabbi Simcha Krauss will say he never used the Getz HaKohen. He's never needed to use that yet. He hasn't. And in certain cases, they've used Hafkat Kedushin. But he's not saying he necessarily would use it. He's saying that these are cases that you can look. We need to look and delve to see how can we help these women? How can we help these people gain freedom when they're in so much pain? And of course, there's one other method of coercion where people like to use, which is violence, which I personally think that that's unfortunate. That we need to resort to violence and such difficulty.
It makes the cover of the New York Times every few years.
Right, and when you talk about that's what we have to resort to as Jewish people. We can't look in the halacha and see that this is a person who's either has some mental instability or is an abusive person or has real rishus, is a real evil person.
Right.
Has a really. We can't use that. Instead, we need to resort to violence.
And the Chil Hashem, it's on the cover of the paper. A man won't give wife again, so the rabbis hijack him and beat him up. And what kind of system is this?
Right.
What are we?
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that what we've seen from these new Batei Din that have worked hard to really have transparency, allow also, what I didn't say, is a place for a woman to feel represented and cared for, and really, because often women go before these Batei Din, and let's talk about who represents them.
That's right.
They don't have most of the people, for the most part, the way the world is that often the woman in a relationship is financially inferior in terms of what she can spend in many of these marriages, in many of these cases of Igun. And it's unfortunate that you have not representation, women who are actually sold a bill of goods when they're in seminary, and they're told, you have to make the home, and it's for you in the home, you have to cause the peace in the home, and if there's some interruption or disruption, it's you. It's on you. And they're told that. And we need to educate these women. And so, by the way, as much as it's on the courts, and it's on us to totally go after these individuals and tell them how they're being unfair, it's on the community to make sure that education of girls, make sure that they're being represented properly, making sure that they understand that they themselves are not to blame, and not the evil person, and they often are being looked upon that way when gittin are withheld. So these are things that are actually I kind of am.
And in addition to the lack of representation, the gender bias of the court. The bias is inevitable.
And one other thing, which I didn't say, which I wouldn't like to mention by name, but there are many cases where I know when Rivka Hout used to be in Brooklyn and go to these courts, and I've heard of other cases, these Batei Din, and I know in England some cases, and there are clear cases where someone needs a get, for their daughter. The only way after so long is when there's a huge sum of money that's paid. And only the haves get the gittin, not the have-nots. And so if you have a wealthy father for a girl, you'll get the get. But otherwise, and by the way, it's not only that the spouse might get the money, but the Batei Din themselves, the Dayanim get it. And those Dayanim need to be eradicated.
Yeah, that's right. Mamish Rishus. So, there's one other approach you didn't mention, and I probably know why you didn't mention, because I don't like it. But I hear more people talking about it, and that's avoiding Kedusha. And those who want to avoid the institution of marriage and basically form a respectful relationship outside, because they feel Kedusha itself is now the value is eroded. I mean, I hope we don't come to that, right? What would you say? What would you say to that?
I understand why it's happening.
Yeah, right.
I understand why it's happening.
Right.
I think I think we did it to ourselves.
Right.
I understand why it's happening, because women don't want, if you are marrying a spouse who cares for you and doesn't want you ever to have to feel unequal in that way. But the truth is, the way our prescription of Kiddushin occurs, it's that he definitely has the handover, right? Yeah. But what that means is that the beauty of what Kiddushin could be and has the potential of being has been abused so greatly, and not by anyone except for the rabbinic leadership or the authoritative leadership of our Jewish people. And I'm not saying that that's across the board, because I just mentioned all these dayanim and these rabbanim who are amazing, who are working really hard to make sure that that's not the case. But the community has also not supported the proper way a woman should be treated. And as a result, in our society, we see what are we supposed to do? We leave ourselves wide open. So if the prenups aren't working and the postnups aren't working, and we have rabbanim who are saying, okay, your kids are going to be a mamzer. Well, I don't want to have a mamzer. So what do you want me to do? Do you want me to be in a situation where I'm going to be, in a marriage where I can't get out, and then I want to continue living my life? So what else is, and so you asked me, do I find that it's incredibly sad and unfortunate. For those people who do it, I understand. And I'm not to judge it, because clearly I know someone actually who lived through it with her own family life, and ended up, I will never be in that situation that my mother was in. And so of course she's going to go that way, because the courts didn't support it. But here you have some courts who are trying to support it. And
we should support them, and we need to support them.
And I think their transparency of what they're doing is important. Let me just say something about this.
We'll conclude on this point.
That Hillel and Shammai disputed marriages, and in theory, the way they understood things, they should have had mamzerim and eshet ish. They continue to marry each other. If you have court cases in Israel, and you have the Rabbanut saying, "I don't agree with the way the ruling went." If you have people who are Shomer Mitzvos and great Talmidei Chachamim, who are spending their time establishing these based on a precedent within Halacha, you can't say that those kids are mamzerim. I find that that's a problem, and more than ever, women need advocates in Batei Din. I appreciate the concept of Chumrah and Kula to be stringent on matters of mamzerut and eshet ish. But like what Shmuly says in Eruvin, which is a very important concept in issues of kashrut and Shabbos, but I want to say it needs to be employed here. L'chumrah lahatam kula hu hacha, u'l'kula tehatam chumrah hu hacha. When you have a chumrah, you have a kula, and you can turn it over on its face. One person's chumrah is another person's kula, and vice versa. We need to be machmir, strict on grounds, on eshet ish and mamzerut. I appreciate that. So let's be mekil. Mekil meaning lenient on cases of agunot. And what that means is, actually, when you're mekil on agunot, you're machmir on pikuach nefesh. And you're machmir on releasing those imprisoned. These women's lives are destroyed, and they don't work. And they need people in our community who are advocating. And this is something, when people say that we're supposed to be machmir and agunot, with all due respect, I want to say that that's not true. You look at the Shutim of Rav Eliyahu Mizrahi, where he says, we're going to be machmir on an aguna. For him, he says, because it's greater an emergency than anything else, because the woman will remain an aguna all her life, and a mishap will definitely happen. Now, he's talking about potential adultery on her part. And I'm saying, you can say that. You can say that, But I think that it actually goes one step further. And this is really more of an issue of lo tamod al dam re'echa. That's right. And Rav Moshe says in his Igros Moshe, and I need to give you these quotes because I find that we don't employ them enough. He says, and it's in his Igros Moshe in the first Chelek, in the first section, he says it's a major prohibition to leave a wife chained to her husband if one has the ability to address her situation and doesn't resolve it. I view that as not standing idly by.
That's right.
And we have them in place. And we have people are ready to do that. So if they're ready to do it and your Beit Din isn't ready, okay. But don't call them a mamzer and don't dismiss that court. And we have, and then finally, Hartzvi in his Chivot Habach, he wrote, anyone who frees an Aguna is if he rebuilt one of the ruins of Jerusalem. And I want to add to that, that Kol HaMakayim Nefesh, in Israel are not, Keim Olam Maleh. That anyone who saves a life, you're saving an entire world. We are machmir. We push off Shabbos. We do all these things where people are chayav kares.
That's
right. You have to do this, and I'm saying that this is what we all, as a community, we need to educate women of their rights and to help them have a strong voice early on in marriage and know that if something is not right, that they need to call it out. And even men who can't, I don't want to discount them. And there shouldn't be abuses. There shouldn't be oppression. There should be a way in which we within our insular community can make it possible for these women to have a life. Because if not, there is suicide, there's serious illness, there are people who don't know their children, and there are people who can't have children because they can't go elsewhere. And then there are people who leave our faith. And that is a risk that I think none of us are willing to take, nor should we. Let's make sure that we rebuild and we save. That is where our directive is.
We dare not be morally complicit, halachically complicit. We should support the institutions, the Batei Din doing the work, the institutions that are upholding the dignity of the integrity of the Torah and the dignity of human beings, of Klal Yisrael. And I encourage you to read the wonderful writings of Rabbi Dina Najman and check out her amazing shul, the Kehilah in Riverdale, and really one of the great rabbis, one of the great Orthodox rabbis of our time. And it's a great zchut to learn from you. And I have 50 questions I want to ask, but in the interest of time, to be continued. Thank you.